Welcome to episode number 33 of Detour 365, and we're looking at Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 through 17 today. So a continuation of what we were talking about last time, the burning bush. This is the burning bush, or that burning bush, part 2. And we are live and in person this time, so recording might sound slightly different, but Nathaniel will be reading this time, and he is reading from the version of choice, which is New Living Bible?
New Living Translation.
Oh, New Living Translation.
Yes.
NLT. All right. So you are clear as you start.
All right, and just to give a little bit of context, Moses and God are speaking about Moses going down into Egypt to speak with Pharaoh and
Oh, yes.
the people.
Yes. Right? Moses was summoned. So do listen to the last episode where we look at the kind of gives you more details on this, but Moses escaped to the wilderness. He saw a burning bush, and it was God getting his attention, and he went up to the burning bush, and he was being called to go back to Egypt to deliver the people from slavery. So,
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Chapter is titled Signs for Moses. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. "Now put it back into your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what you say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take the staff in your hand so that you can perform the signs with it."
Very good. Slightly different from the ESV, which I have over here and I've looked at, but similar enough. Now this story of the burning bush has frequently been used. I don't know if you remember the Experiencing God books. The burning bush was kind of a central story that they used, an example. And I'm wondering how because we kind of have everything in the story. We have God's plan to deliver the people, and the timing and everything is just right. The 400 years, and Moses was selected to be the deliverer that was going to go back, and God was going to use him to bring out these millions of people that were now in Egypt to the promised land, basically. And I'm wondering, Moses does resist the calling here. He doesn't, I guess you could say he kind of says no, sort of, or tries to.
Which I'd never heard of before, to be honest.
Oh, that he said no?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I'd never heard that he actually volunteered his brother, or God volunteered his brother. And then it was...
to be the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't think that's portrayed in any popular stories either. Popular versions of this story that I'm aware of.
Well, in the movies about it, like the old Ten Commandments, it has. But Aaron was always kind of a supportive role, so he wasn't like a... I don't know about the Disney movie, if they show
I was
Aaron
kind of thinking of
the Prince of Egypt.
Yeah, that Disney movie, and then there's a more recent one, but anyway.
Yeah. Because when we talk about God's will, you have God's will as far as like the big important things that have to happen. And again, this is as far as I have understood it. Then you have God's will for our individual lives and kind of the path, like the best path that we could be on. But I just kind of wonder, because you have Moses's free will here, him kind of trying to resist, and you have God's will. What if Moses had said no, or he was? It seems like it does kind of seem like he was trying to say no in the story, and I'm wondering how much of this, because this story is used as an example about when God calls us, and it's often a task or we all have a calling and a purpose, and it always involves, it might not be leading millions of people out of Egypt, which was one of the world powers at that time, and something that big, but it's always something that involves God's power and gifts to accomplish. I guess I'm wondering what you all think about how much this story applies to us and when God calls us to do something, because this is clearly a special case, because this was a very important thing that God wanted to happen, and Moses was prepared, you could say, for 80 years, because he was a prince for 40 years. He was allowed to be a prince for 40 years, learned leadership and kind of the government structure of Egypt, and at least he learned how to be a leader, and he was educated. And then he spent 40 years in the wilderness, so he learned how to survive out in the wilderness, and both of those were skills he would need to lead the people out.
He also should have learned some priestly duties from his father-in-law.
Oh, yes.
Who is the priest of Midian.
Yeah,
he was prepared to be the replacement for him, right?
So if Moses had said no, that would have been 80 years of... I mean, he was trying to say no in the story. He was using his... And we don't know how much of a speech issue he really had. It kind of, to me, it seems like he was just kind of using that as an excuse.
Well, he came up to this burning bush, and I imagine he was just scared to death. Here he is confronted with, he would have been somewhat familiar with the God of the Hebrews.
Yeah.
We don't know how much of the Hebrew faith he had ever heard of. But here he is confronted with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I imagine that he was shocked clear down to the bottom of his toes. That he is met with this, to him, all-powerful being who is now telling him that he is going to go down to Pharaoh in Egypt, where there's a price on his head. He is going to go up to Pharaoh and tell him, you're going to let all these Jews go out into the desert for 3 days to worship. Now,
wait, that's all he was asking?
Well, that was kind of the beginning. That was
the beginning of what was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
He was supposed to lead the nation of Israel out into the desert to 3 days to worship their God.
Well, at least that was but they knew that Pharaoh would say no to that. So he kept, and then eventually it was, we're just going to go.
We're going to leave. But how scared would you have been?
But Moses Moses was amazed at the sight, but he had also witnessed a lot of the arts and the quote unquote magic of we don't know exactly how much of the mysteries of the Egyptian. They could do a few things. The Egyptian.
I am sure that they could do a few things, but nothing like the power communicated by our God.
But he said no, or he tried to use his speech as an excuse, even after God said, I will go with you.
Oh, yeah.
Well, now, what do you mean they could do a few things? Because are you inferring that there are minor gods that have some power?
They could have been harnessing demonic powers or some sort of they had some sort of technologies. Who knows with ancient Egypt? There's a lot of mystery there, but Moses would have been familiar. It does talk about it a little bit in Exodus, that they could turn the Nile red also, and they could do all these other things. Some of the earlier signs that Moses performed, or that God performed through Moses, the Egyptian priests could also do it.
No.
Like turn and now it could have been like a sleight of hand sort of thing. It could have been some sort of power of the dark side or something like that.
Some planned effect.
Yeah.
Go
ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, how does this relate to the plagues?
The plagues?
Plagues.
Oh. Well, some of the plagues that it does say in Exodus that
because do those signs kind of transmute into plagues once their signs don't work?
Yeah, Moses, even the staff turning into a snake, the Egyptians were able to do that, but then Moses' snake ate their snake, so it was kind of,
That does raise I feel like a fairly important question. How did that happen?
But then it did get to a point where they couldn't.
Because
the plagues kind of escalated to a point.
Is there polytheism in the Bible? Because
the forces that oppose God do have powers. They can do. It even says in Doesn't Jesus say the Antichrist will perform signs and wonders and deceive people, you know?
Yeah.
So people can be deceived by signs and wonders, but, you know, I mean, of course, God can do more, but
So that was some maybe forbidden knowledge left over from the Nephilim or something like that. I don't know.
could have been. I mean,
And there are certain, well, this is conversation for another day,
yeah,
but there are spirits in the world. This is a world which has spirits other than, you know, other than God's angels and our spirits. And we need to understand that.
And I guess the main point of me mentioning that was that Moses would have witnessed at least some of that as a prince, even if he saw them constructing large edifices or some kind, you know, impressive stuff. Moses was witness to a lot of impressive stuff, and he was really impressed by this burning bush that wasn't consumed. And I just wonder. Well, I wonder why in the world he would say no. I mean, you could say that he was comfortable. He was 80 years old. He was comfortable where he was. He didn't want to go back. But if you know,
He just thought it was a poor choice.
yeah, I mean, but maybe he assumed that God was going to have him do it all on his own. But God said, you know, I'll be with you. And again, that could be that when we think about our own calling and purpose, that we assume. I guess a big pitfall is trying to rely on our own abilities to accomplish things or project ourselves into the future and think, well, how am I going to do, even if we feel like God has called us to do something, even without seeing a burning bush, you know, we have a strong impression that God has called us to do something, and we think into the future like, well, that'd be impossible for me to do.
I know I am 75, and I would have serious doubts about going from the desert of Midian into Egypt and leading people out, even if God were to stand here and tell me, let's go.
In a burning bush, and you audibly heard,
Oh.
maybe you would start to question, maybe that was just my imagination or something. Maybe that was just a dream.
uh,
But it wasn't like
your
after
young
the
men
fact,
will
you know.
have visions, and your old men will dream dreams. I mean, but yeah, I would doubt myself.
But there would be context that would enable, like, that Moses already had, like, to frame that as not dreaming, like.
Yeah, because he was
knew,
interacting.
Yeah.
Well, because he knew of supposedly he would have known of the powers of the priests back home.
Yeah.
And so this kind of thing wouldn't be entirely foreign to him. Right? So he should have
I think he's 80 years old, and he's just old, and he's tired, and he doesn't want to do this.
Yeah.
You know, that's just getting old and tired, and I don't want to. I don't want to.
But the ironic thing is, at the end of his life, he's 120, and it says that he still has his strength, his vigor. Yeah.
You know, once he got started, I don't think he had a problem. I think it was that we all have to. It's just like any physics problem. You have inertia. You have to overcome the inertia of being at rest.
Yeah.
And Moses in Midian is at rest.
Yeah.
He's been herding sheep and essentially at rest.
I mean, not an easy rest, but
Herding sheep in Midian is
Probably
no
not.
big deal.
yeah, well, that's true. I mean, it's not like has to
He
deal with a
has
lot of
not
people.
had a heavy duty job for a long time.
Yeah,
And now God is here telling him, well, pick up your hands and feet, pack up your duffel, and go to Egypt. You're going to lead the Israelites out.
yeah,
And Moses has to overcome this personal inertia. He has to move himself out of this complacent state of being at rest into a state of activity. And after a long period of time of being at rest, that's difficult for anybody.
Now, was he already past the life expectancy probably of that time?
Yeah.
I mean,
Expectancy?
80 years old was
maybe-
incredibly old.
Well, they did. So once you made it through childhood, though, your life expectancy wasn't well.
I guess
it
like
was,
adult
it was noticeably
life
different from
expectancy.
today, but it wasn't
Yeah.
as much as people think it was. Like the life expectancy of someone who made it through to adulthood
Yeah.
was much greater than 35.
Oh yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just like the average lifespan because there was so much death
Death at childhood.
between
yeah.
like the ages of 1 and 4 ish. That the average lifespan was lowered to like say 35 back then.
Yeah.
But that's a big misconception as far as people thinking that
yeah.
like most people that made it to adulthood only lived to be 35. That's not true.
And
People live to be 70. you know,
yeah.
like,
But I guess would he be like an
78.
80-year-old today? I would assume so.
I would think so.
Maybe
I don't know,
a fit
he'd probably
80
be in
or-
a lot, like maybe even better shape. Because look at the people that live in like the older people that live in like we're a lot less active as a
Yeah.
result of our
That's
technological advancements.
Yeah.
People that have been active their whole life generally are actually in better shape.
I mean, he was tough enough to herd sheep at age 80.
yeah,
So
That's
says
not-
something.
yeah. Can't do that sitting in a chair.
What do you think about his excuse, though, the whole speech thing? Because he
I
evidently
think that he's
later
just
on
being
doesn't
honest.
have. Yeah, well,
I think that for
was
I
he
think
really
he's
that
being
bad at
honest. I think
saying?
Average life expectancy during the Bronze Age was maybe up to 40.
okay, but that's again that's average life expectancy.
Average life expectancy.
That's including.
So if he
some
made
people's
it
death.
through 40, he was doing pretty good.
No. That's what I was saying.
Is there a life expectancy number that doesn't take into account, like, people that died?
Because that is including the high, like over 50% of people died, like or like around like 50% or something,
In the
some
first
crazy
few
number like that
years,
died
yeah.
within the first few years of their life.
Yeah.
That's an enormous reason why the average life
So
expectancy
probably
is so low.
60.
But if you made it into like past the age of like 12 to where you were like a full
Yeah.
bodied person, pretty much like
Huh.
your life expectancy was
But he
fairly
evidently, I mean,
similar
he
to
doesn't. He doesn't have trouble speaking. This whole speech thing never comes up again in Exodus. This is just him in his excuse here that he's giving. He says, "I'm slow of tongue."
well. But then again, if he's using his brother to do the heavy lifting
Yeah.
speech wise,
Do you think he relied on his brother the whole time, or do you think because it does say later on in Exodus that Moses spoke to Pharaoh, and maybe Aaron spoke to the people.
Yeah.
You don't think he was hauling Aaron around in to speak to Pharaoh?
Is Aaron mentioned again?
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Aaron's
Oh, okay.
Aaron's at his side all the time.
Yeah.
So we can just assume that they're a pair. whenever Moses is mentioned then. Or
But it does seem that he gets, because he encounters these, he overcomes the inertia and he goes to Egypt. And it does seem like as he's going, he's gaining in faith and confidence, and he becomes this really confident leader later on in Exodus. And he even has that moment where he kind of goes into, he makes that mistake of like hitting the rock.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
God
I
doesn't
know.
allow him
Maybe.
to go to, he makes this mistake of like, what was he angry, or was it kind of like a pride thing?
Well, he was angry and he was angry and proud.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of times in our conversations here, you've spoke of things being in the Bible for the purpose of being able to relate to them.
Right.
Well,
This story,
fairly,
though,
I think the number one fear of people is actually like
imposter
even more than
syndrome?
death.
Or-
It's public speaking.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Do you think this was like imposter syndrome combined with public speaking, combined with he was comfortable and didn't want to go?
I'm not sure, but this would certainly allow people to relate to Moses.
Yeah. And I often think like if I only audibly heard. Yeah, I've had instances. Oh, what's that?
I was pointing at the
Oh, the Cheez-Its or the
table, I guess, I don't know.
I don't know about you, but sometimes I can get a feeling that God's pointing me in a certain direction, or I read passages and I have different synchronicities, and I have different things that kind of are serendipitous that seem to point me in a direction. I feel like the Holy Spirit's telling me to go this way. But I often think if it's something big, I'd really like to just have some big sign, like a burning bush, and to hear the voice, or to hear a booming voice.
Mm-hmm.
But evidently the story kind of shows us that even if you get that, Moses got that. He got a big burning bush that wasn't consumed. He got the Charlton Heston Ten Commandments movie has like a big deep voice. I am the Lord, that's, but if you heard something like that, I mean, maybe some people would kind of doubt that, I must be hallucinating or something, but I mean, I have met people that have said they've heard God's voice or something, that, like audibly heard a voice.
Well, then you got the guy on TV that can talk to God on his cell phone.
Which one?
There's a preacher,
Oh.
I think preacher from Africa or something that claimed he could talk to God on his cell phone. Yeah, he was selling that
That'd be
service.
interesting. But I mean, I guess that's just kind of like something that people do say, like, if only God actually told me, and I heard a voice, and I saw, I heard and I saw with my senses, and then I'd believe, and then I'd absolutely do whatever I was told, and I'd have, unshakable faith, and I'd just go forward. But evidently Moses got that, and he still was kind of like, well, I can't really speak I can't speak good, it's like,
Well,
so,
one thing that we have the scriptures for,
yeah,
and one thing, it is a point that's made in the scriptures, is with the tool that we have in the book, we are required to take that step of faith. We are required to believe in the Son of God.
well,
He
yeah,
will not give us absolute proof. He has told us that until he comes back in the clouds, and then it's too late. But until he comes back in the clouds, he isn't going to come back in a burning bush and talk to us.
Well, so
Oh, now
think-
this. Oh no, go ahead. But that reminded me of something when you talked about. It reminded me of the people that were with Jesus and saw the miracles, and still not all of them believed, not all of them followed. And even at the end of when he had been raised from the dead, and they saw him, and he says, right before he went back,
Yep.
back up into the clouds, so to speak.
all right, so no matter
Yeah,
if
said
you
that some
have
doubted still, basically. That not everyone believed, even though they saw him after they had seen him die on the cross and be buried. They saw him again. Some of them still,
Did not believe.
yeah, which is amazing to me. Anyway,
Mind-boggling.
but anyway, sorry.
Satanic fire is mighty strong,
so
stronger than I can even explain.
Yes.
And it's, the pic, I don't know if y'all noticed it. What's on my mind right now is for an example, is what's been on the news. 60 Minutes showed it one time. Airplane pilots for the United States Air Force are seeing this light, and they've got it cameras and pictures of it, and then they're in these high 1,000-mile-an-hour jets, and they can't keep up with it. It's gone so fast.
Oh yeah, a
So-
lot of that UFO and UAP stuff. That's
So this, the spirit war that's going on is way out of our range,
Yes.
and it's been revealed to us on TV.
yeah.
I think-
There is a lot of
well, I was just gonna complete what I felt like we were
Oh, yeah,
sort of
yeah, go ahead.
dancing around there, was that
Sure.
I'll write down.
no matter
UFOs,
what, I guess if you yeah, I guess belief is a choice no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
which is a strange thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess regardless, evidence and
'Cause you can have-
experiences help,
you
but
can have
often it
different-
all comes down to,
Levels of evidence available,
yeah,
but it still comes down to making that
yeah.
choice.
Because you could always write it off as I imagined it, or I mean, to a certain extent. But yeah, there are levels of evidence, and yeah,
And I don't wanna-
yeah,
Misrepresent myself, but
yeah.
Choosing to believe things seems necessary in life, and yet it
Right.
is not scientifically.
But I guess,
the
yeah,
way to
what you
find
said,
truth.
though, every belief is a choice, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know
Yeah.
William and I have, different types of experiences,
Yeah.
and you, Steve, that cause us to believe. And those are things that you have not experienced, or if you have, they are things that have not been sufficient to cause you to believe.
Well, your belief is more you don't know, or you're kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Uh,
beliefs are things that
Which I guess is still
Are
technically
necessary.
a belief, right? To me, it is, because it's still a position. you're still taking a position. It's just a neutral position.
But I know I have experienced enough things in my life.
I'm just listening.
Yeah.
And thinking.
I have experienced enough things to support my belief that Jesus is the Son of God, and that he is sitting at the right hand of God the Father, and that someday he will come back, and that there is justice in the universe, and that one day justice will be satisfied, and mercy will be shown to all of those who sincerely believe in Christ and have accepted him as his Savior.
And when we use phrases like that, at least to me, it is a belief, but I don't know exactly what it looks like. Like what Jesus sitting at the right hand of God the Father looks like. I just, whether it's a literal he's sitting on the right side, or I don't know what. I mean, but it is an expression, like the right hand side.
I'm merely taking a snapshot out of Revelation.
Yeah. I was just using that as an example.
Are we getting?
What's that?
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Are we getting
Off topic.
Oh, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes,
we are.
You almost got me with the UFOs. I almost went.
Oh well, we can talk.
Because we do. I do want to do an episode on.
You do like the UFO subject.
I do.
I like space stuff.
But we are diverging from the burning bush.
Well, and there
Moses,
is. Yeah.
Moses overcoming that inertia of his.
Yeah.
And look at the signs that he is given by God.
I
want to throw in a real practical thing real quick.
Yeah,
Sure.
go ahead.
There's some terminology where it's like I forget. It's been a while since I read this, but like the difficulty of starting something, like overcoming that barrier, the barrier to like initial action or something. Like say you getting out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be really tough. But then once you're out of bed, it's like, okay, well, all I have to do is maybe you still really want to go back to bed. I don't know. But starting something is testably the most difficult phase or one of the most difficult phases of any process.
Yeah.
Is that initial start, making a decision and actually acting on that decision to start.
Yeah.
The best way to overcome that is to just take like a smaller step. So like when I start cleaning, like say I'm going to clean a room or something, a lot of times I'll just go through and be like, okay, well I'm just going to throw away the trash first.
Yeah.
Just find all the trash and throw that away because it's easy and you feel like you accomplished something. Then it's like, okay, well I'm already moving and doing stuff. Let me organize this and that. And just that little kind of rule of starting with a small, taking that first step, make it small.
You got that from
so that you start.
Jordan Peterson.
Maybe, did I?
Yeah, I think I read that.
Well, his
he does talk about
like
clean like a
breaking
pile.
down.
Yeah.
Making specifically, he talks about like in that regard talks about making steps small enough that you will actually do them.
Yeah.
Which is very similar. It's almost like looking at the same thing from a different angle. Same idea.
So I think like Moses was thinking about the immensity of this task of leading these millions of people out of Egypt, and Egypt was one of the most powerful empires, if not the most powerful one at the time.
It with the help of his brother, which made the task smaller for him.
Yeah, but even still,
but
he was thinking about but he was thinking about the whole he was kind of projecting into the future and thinking about the immensity of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Whereas God just told him just to start, just to go. And it'll work out as you go, sort of. I mean, which I guess is true with any kind of immense thing that we do, or, I mean, any journey we take, you know, one step, but I mean, you could think about the immensity of it, and that it seems impossible.
Yeah. What's the Lord of the Rings quote? Every journey begins with, I don't know, maybe that's not from
The
Lord of
first
the Rings
step.
specifically, but
I thought that was a Chinese
probably.
proverb. A
Yeah.
journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step, or something like that. But it does seem like God calls us to these things, and it takes faith just to start, because it's like human nature to kind of think about the entire.
And that's what I think a big
You know.
role of belief plays. Belief changes what you're afraid of,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you do things in a large degree because you're afraid of the consequences
Yeah.
of not doing them.
Yeah. But you would think, though, that would work in this case, that Moses would have immediately said yes, because you would be afraid. I mean, he was evidently in awe of the sight and what he was experiencing, and probably there was more to it probably than just a burning bush, that, you know, he probably felt something when he was there, just being in the presence, and even seeing the signs, you know, where he put his hand in his cloak and came out as leprous, and his staff turned into a snake, and
Which is interesting because God did kind of like
give him some
prove
signs.
himself,
Right. Yeah.
which is fairly unique as far as fairly unique in the Bible.
So he had a visual with the burning bush. He heard audible voice, as far as we can tell. He was given 2 signs and commanded a few times, and he still tried to get out of it.
Yeah. So Moses was given inspiration.
Yeah,
in the form
he
of
was
physical
really.
displays.
Which I do want to ask. You know, this is such an important thing that God had decided was going to happen, as far as like the people needed to come out of Egypt at this time. You know, and he promised Abraham, your descendants will be in Egypt for 400 years, and they'll, you know, come back. And they knew a deliverer was coming. And God had selected Moses for this. How much does this relate to, and I think I had kind of asked this earlier, should we take this story as like a one-for-one, like it's exactly the same as God calling us to, you know, because God calls us to do things that are big, but not necessarily as big as this, but definitely something beyond.
No,
But it's not as important as this.
yeah. Well, one of
You
the
know.
best ways to like pull a conclusion from a test is to like perform the test in, and I'm getting to something, is to perform
Okay.
the test in like an extreme scenario,
Oh, okay.
right? So
Okay.
then you get
Yeah.
a conclusion from that. So like if you're trying to like make a point,
Yeah.
get a point across to someone, you might
Okay.
like set a table, an idea table of them for them, of like
Yeah.
a extreme scenario.
Yeah.
So this Moses scenario is relatively an extreme scenario
It is definitely that.
that
yeah.
you can say, okay, well, if this guy can accomplish that, then you know,
Yeah.
he's not gonna accomplish going to work.
Yeah.
I think the people wanted to kill Moses, and that's what was programmed in his mind.
He was chased out of there, exiled.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah. And
And
he's been
beyond
thinking
it.
about that for 40 years.
You've been thinking about it for 40 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
But it is interesting that it does say that when he goes to Egypt, that the people that wanted to kill him were dead by the time he gets back there.
I think so.
But I mean, Pharaoh does kind of try to. I mean, the people do try to. The Hebrews do try to kill him. They try to stone him right on, almost like right off the bat. They very angry at him. So, but that is a good example. You know, that is a good example of how examples work, using an extreme, but it is something that what Moses was called to is something that, and this is one model of understanding God's will, it is something that had to happen. Whereas, like, let's say God calls Bill to start a church tomorrow. Will that, that is not necessarily something that, maybe it is something in God's eyes that has to happen, but your reaction if you say no versus Moses tries to say no, but God does not really allow. It seems to me that God doesn't really allow. I guess he could have backed out, but
he
it
does
seems
successfully negotiate with God, which is in keeping with our.
Yeah, it is in keeping with our
human, what is it?
Humanity of God series, which I should have mentioned earlier, but why we chose this. And it also says that God was angry with him,
Yeah, and he shows an emotion again.
Yeah.
He works with Moses.
Yeah.
He, in some senses, manipulates Moses. God uses his anger, and he uses Moses' brother.
And it is kind of funny that Moses' brother was already on the way anyway. Almost like God knew he was going to do this.
Yeah, and God was the one that told Moses that his brother was on the way, right? Or
Yeah.
he knew that. Though.
Your brother's on the way. I know he can speak well. It's like. So I guess that is and why do you think God was frustrated with Moses, even though it does seem like God knew Moses was going to do this? But I guess maybe you can still be frustrated with somebody if you know they're going to do something. Because Moses could have said yes, and then Aaron would have still been on the way. Or maybe not.
I don't think God was frustrated with Moses.
Or his anger was kindled when Moses kind of made this remark, like, send somebody. When Moses said, send somebody else, God said.
I think God used his anger as a motivation for Moses.
Yeah.
I don't think God was pushed to anger. I think God used anger as a tool, as a motivational tool for Moses to help push Moses over that hump that Moses was sitting on.
Yeah.
Moses needed a little extra oomph.
Yeah.
And what's gonna conjure up a little extra fear in somebody besides getting God angry at you?
Yeah. It must have been something Moses felt, or impression that Moses got. That maybe the fire of the bush grew.
I think Moses was in many ways aware of God's anger.
If they made a movie scene out of this, the fire would
grow.
The fire
bigger.
would have been more than if we could have felt what Moses felt, there would have been intensity of feeling in Moses. It would not have been just regular raising of voice.
Yeah.
I think God used it as a tool because he already knew what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wasn't surprised.
Yeah. Well, and we've had that discussion several times where kind of, and I think it's been mostly me to bring it up, where I'm like, okay, well, if God knows everything that's going to happen, why does he bother to get angry? Or why does he get angry about, why do things seem to surprise him? Because anger usually results from being surprised by the outcome of something in some way. Like if you're completely like, okay, well, that's going to happen. Like if you actually know, you can kind of expect things and still get angry, but if you actually know for a fact what's going to happen, I don't really think you're going to get angry. You're just going to plan ahead around that already. But your meta interpretation of the kind of reason for that, I don't know, it's never, as far as I can tell, it's never said in the Bible, but that reasoning for the anger. But
No, it's never said in the Bible because it is significant that God expresses human traits.
Well, and the whole phrase like God-fearing, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's not viewed as a negative phrase, you know.
That's right.
No.
So that does speak to fear being just a legitimate motivator for action.
Yes. And awe, being in awe of God. That is fearing God, but that is not a negative.
Yeah.
That is not a negative.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that. Fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom. And that's not a negative.
Yeah.
It's what reaches, I think, deepest inside of people for motivation is the reaction to fear.
Well, and anger isn't necessarily in and of itself. I mean, Jesus got angry certain times at the unbelief of the hardness of heart of people, and you know.
Well, Jesus got angry at people, but what was important about that was the people's response to Jesus. It was their fear of his anger. That was what was important.
Well, and also we're shown that we're also given that as an example, you know, that this makes, in the Old Testament, this makes God angry, you know, so don't do it.
Yeah.
This makes, you know, Jesus angry in the New Testament, and we're given examples of what those things are, like the Pharisees getting upset about him healing on the Sabbath,
Mm-hmm.
and their hypocrisy, and the people, the money lenders, and the people selling stuff in the temple, and that kind of stuff.
I mean, we never see Jesus doing terrible things with his anger, but there's some visceral fear at what Jesus could do.
Yeah. I mean, well, and I mean, we are given the sort of rest of the story of what will happen in Revelation, that, you know, the second coming, and, you know, that's going to be his mission in the New Testament and the Gospels was to be the, you know,
He's going to be the judge.
Yeah, he will be the judge, but he was, when he came to seek and save the lost, you know, and he said, I'm not, didn't he say, I'm not coming to judge, but you know, I've come to, I don't want to misquote, but like I've always read that his mission in the gospel was to
His mission in the
offer.
gospel was to seek and save the lost.
Right, and then he's coming back to judge later on.
Yeah.
You know. So I guess that's what I was getting at. You know.
And it's important that that message is remembered.
Yeah.
That's two distinct times that we will see the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And we will experience two completely different personalities shown by the same character.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even John's encounter with him in Revelation,
Yeah.
even though it's the same person, does he not recognize? I mean, he kind of recognizes Jesus, but not really.
He recognizes Jesus
But
right
it's-
off.
But it's different. He's different.
Oh, he's completely different.
Yeah.
Fire out of his eyes and
Yeah, it's like so. Are there any other thoughts on this? I don't want to go too far. You know, I could mention some things about what we're looking at next time, but I could leave that for next time.
Let's leave that for next time.
But it is a fascinating passage we will be looking at next time.
What's the title of
I haven't worked out the title.
it? Or what's the passage?
It is what immediately follows this when Moses starts to go back to Egypt. He takes his wife Zipporah and his son with him. And they're staying at, it's one of the less known stories in the Exodus, in the book of Exodus, because it's kind of not one that people, I don't know if I've ever heard a sermon about this.
So next week, so upcoming, talking about one of the
yeah, I
lesser
mean,
known.
it's one of the, I mean, it's one of the more bizarre stories in Exodus, I think. And Exodus has a lot of bizarre stories, but this will give us, well, just kind of it fits with our theme, of course, because it does say God tries to put Moses to death. Moses is going back to Egypt, and they stop at an inn, or
Well, don't tell everybody the conclusion.
well, no.
Yeah,
But
just-
it's later on in chapter 4. Just if you want to read ahead.
It's there in the book.
It's there in the book. So, thank you for any other thoughts? I do want it before I. All right. Well, I guess that concludes. We made it in under an hour. Look at that. 57 minutes, 58 seconds. Thank you for listening. We will continue next week. Continue on in Exodus chapter 4, starting from verse 18. Have a good week.